What's up guys? In this video I'm going to show you how to retrim this boring window right here. Let's do it. So this project is part of a larger project that I'm working on in my son's room. If you haven't checked out that video, you can always, I think it's over here, click that link right there. It will link you to the video where I redid his accent wall. And on that accent wall, there's a little window that I also trimmed out as well. So I'm trying to match this window to that window. What I've done so far here is remove the window sill as well as the window apron. It was very traditional looking and that doesn't really fit the style that we're trying to go for in here. We're going to go for a more square look, no round over edges. Everything is nice and clean. And there's going to be not really a overhang on the window sill. It's just going to be flush to the frame that we'll put on the outside of the window. Now that I have the window sill removed, I'll show you a clip right here of how to remove the window sill. It's pretty easy. You just got to cut through the caulking that is sealing the edges of the window sill, and then you just take a pry bar with a hammer and kind of like just yank it out. You want to make sure not to damage the drywall. That's going to give you a little bit more work later on that is needed. So want to be careful, make sure you really do cut the seams. That will make things a lot easier later on for you. Now that I have the window sill removed, I'm going to cut the new window sill and pin it in place with some brad nails. And then we're going to work on the frame after that. And then the final step would be to add all of the Bondo, wood filler, whatever you want to use. In this case, I'm going to use Bondo. And then we're going to seal up the edge with caulking and finally do our primer and paint coat. And that is pretty much it for this project. It's a pretty quick project. Let's get to it.
I'm going to use a piece of primed 1x6. You can find this at any big box store. There are two windows in the room and both of them have different size window sills. Instead of buying two different width 9-foot long pieces, I'll just use this one piece here and cut it to the right length. And then at the table saw, I'll rip it down to the right width. In this case, I needed to rip this board down to 3.5 inches wide. I'll go ahead and test fit it into the actual location before installing the shims and tacking it into place. For some reason, there was a huge gap on one side of the seal. I actually needed to put in a 1/2 inch shim to make sure that the seal was perfectly leveled and even with the bottom of the window. And then on the other side of the seal, I only needed about a 1/8 of an inch shim to get everything leveled out. So I don't know if it's the structure or if it's the framing of this particular window, but if you're going to deal with this kind of unevenness in an older home, you can always just add those shims to make sure that the seal is leveled.
I got the window sill installed and they are pinned in place with the brad nails. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the measurement for the bottom portion of the wood trim that's going to cover up this gap here and hopefully cover up most of this unpainted area here. I'm using a 1x3 strip of wood for the entire frame, so I'm hoping that it'll cover this up. If not, then I'll just have to come back and touch up the paint. To match the rest of the wood trim that I have over my doors in this room, I'm not going to use any mitered corners. It's going to be very nice and simple. I'm just going to run the board all the way to the full width at the bottom here, and it's just going to be joined together with the butt joint for the two vertical pieces, and then the horizontal piece would sit right on top of those two vertical pieces. So pretty simple, nothing too complicated, no miter corners or anything like that, just so I can match the other doors that I have in the room.
With that being said, if you're going to use a trim that has some kind of profile to it, you want to make sure that you are going to use a mitered corner because you want that profile to be continuous around that corner, and using a butt joint will not give you that result. If you want to use a butt joint with your trims that has a profile design to it, at the corners you'll just use a block medallion or a rosetta to finish off the corner. Here I'm just using a scrap piece of trim to make sure that the bottom trim is perfectly centered on the window seal. That way, whenever I'm installing the vertical pieces, there's not an overhang at that bottom edge. I want to make sure that both sides are going to be nice and flush. To install the trim, you're simply going to just tack it in with brad nails. I'm using an 18 gauge cordless brad nail, and the nail lengths that I'm using are 2-inch long nails. I'm going to tack the trim on the side that's closest to the window first, because my walls aren't perfectly flat, and you can see a little bit later on how much of a gap there is. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put some shims at the back of the trim. That way the faces will be perfectly aligned, and later on I won't have to fill that gap or that ledge with Bondo to smooth it out. Doing it this way will make the finishing process a lot quicker, and you're going to get a cleaner edge at that corner. And once you caulk the edges between the trim and the wall, apply some paint, it's going to look really nice. Once I got the shims tacked into place, you can score it with a utility knife and the excess should snap off. You don't have to worry about that exposed piece of shim because the caulking will hide it.
I got the shims installed on all 4 corners. Everything is nice and flush. What I like to do is I like to also do the middle portion here. Adding the shim in the middle will prevent the middle portion of the trim to flex in. That way you won't get this weird dip in the middle, which you can see from the side angle if you don't have that shim. So what's remaining now is to fill all of the nail holes with Bondo, fill the edges with Bondo, sand everything down so it's nice and flush. What we'll do then is we'll just spot prime the locations where I'm applying Bondo. I don't have to prime the entire frame because it's already pre-primed, which is the benefit of using this. Once the primer dries, I'll go ahead and caulk the edges. And finally, we'll go ahead and apply the paint. So let's do that.
I'll go through with the Bondo to fill in all of the nail holes as well as the seams between the 2 pieces of wood, as well as the exposed edge on my butt joint.
Now it's time to go ahead and caulk the edge between the trim and the walls, as well as the window jamb. I'm using paint grade caulking. You can find this at any big box store pretty much. And the key to getting a good caulked edge is you want to make sure the tip is clean. You want to cut your tips at around a 45-degree angle. You don't want to cut it too small, and you don't want to cut it too large where there's too much caulking that's being applied. You want to just cut it to the size of your gap and go a little bit larger than that, just to make sure there's enough caulking that's being applied. And I have a bucket here with some warm water. That's going to help me clean off the tips as well as clean off my finger, because I'm going to use my finger to wipe off the excess. And what you want to do is you want to wet your fingertips and then run it up along the edge to give you a nice clean finish. You don't need to tape the edges. You don't need to add any extra steps to it. If you are patient, if you're taking your time during this process, you're not going to have a huge mess. So let's get to it. So we got the Bondo applied to all of the joints and I went ahead and sanded. One thing to note about the Bondo in this situation, I didn't mix enough hardener into the mixture, so it didn't harden enough for me to sand it off. What I ended up having to do was scrape all of that Bondo off and reapplied it. Just keep that in mind if you are going to use Bondo, make sure you're mixing enough hardener inside of the mixture. If you're going to use wood filler, you probably won't have to run into this issue. Another thing that I would mention is Bondo, it's a little bit harder than wood filler when it comes to sanding. What I ended up needing to do was to use a random orbital sander to sand everything off. Just because a hand sander, it just took a lot of time. And as you can see here, the random orbital sander did take off some of the primer, but that's okay. I'm going to reapply the primer onto those spots anyways. And you should as well. If you're going to use wood filler or Bondo, you want to make sure that you spot prime those areas where you did apply the filler. That way in the end of the paint will be nice and even and you don't have to apply so much finished paint. I'm just using regular white primer since the trim is going to remain white. And the white top coat will be the same white top coats that I have throughout my entire house for the baseboard as well as the door trim. A good tip is whenever you're doing remodels, repainting of your house, just keep like a quart of the color that you're using for your house. In this case, I have a quart of the primer and a quart of the actual color that was used in the entire house. That way you're not guessing what paint color you use, what product did you use. Having a quart of the extra material laying around, I think it really helps you as a homeowner do small projects like this in the future whenever you want to get to it. So let's go ahead and get this thing painted.
You want to shake the paint to make sure that it's mixed thoroughly before you apply it onto the wall. I like to use a paintbrush to apply my primer. It gives me a little bit more control and I can apply a little bit more on than I would with a roller. The roller is going to cause too much of a mess, I think, especially during the priming process, but I will use a roller to apply the final coat of paint. As I'm applying the final top coat of paint, I'm not going all the way to the edge of the wall or the window. I'm actually going to leave myself about 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch gap. That way I can come back later with a paintbrush to cut in that edge. Learning how to cut in paint is going to save you so much time because you don't have to worry about laying out tape to ensure that your edges are nice and clean. And painting is so much quicker if you have 2 people.
All right, as you can see, this project was really simple. You can get it done in a weekend. As you can see, I wanted to keep the project really simple. There's no complicated joinery. Everything is just butt joints. So long as you take the time to prep the surface, do all the prep work, sand everything down nice and smooth, you're gonna get really good, clean results with this. These are the same techniques that I used to build this wall right here. If you haven't checked out that video, go ahead and click the link in the description down below. And that is it for this video. I do hope that you were able to take some of these techniques and apply it to your project. If you did like this video, hit that thumbs up, click the subscribe button, and also the notification bell so you can be notified whenever I release a new video. Make sure you share this video on Facebook and also leave a comment in the description down below. Let me know what your thoughts are. And so that is it. Until next time, this has been Bao at Design Craft Workshop. See ya.
If you like this video, hit that like button and definitely subscribe. Thanks.